Welcome back to It's Not Normal, the podcast, episode 41. In this week's episode, I want to talk about authenticity and the fear of being seen. I had an experience this past weekend that sort of coincided with me picking back up adult children of emotionally immature parents. And I'm currently on chapter 9, and the title of this chapter is How It Feels to Live Free of Roles and Fantasies. And it just sort of felt like this experience that I had this past weekend was sort of like a manifestation of a lot of what I had been reading. And it was really cool to experience those feelings in real life. And it felt like kind of a new experience for me, which is partially why I want to talk about this. On top of authenticity just being such an important part of life and a crucial component to maintaining and developing relationships. So I was out this weekend with a couple of friends from different parts of my life, and I found myself in the moment being really mindful, feeling really present, and feeling like my true self. I was thinking just as much about myself as I was the people around me, and I didn't feel like I was catering to any one particular person or group dynamic, and it was a really refreshing experience. I felt so proud of myself and happy to be in the moment without wondering whether or not I was saying or doing the right thing. I wasn't thinking too much about the way that I was behaving or the way that I was speaking, the words that I was using. It all felt very free and comfortable and relaxed. And I think a big part of why is because I felt in touch with my authentic self. And the reason that I think authenticity is so important is because not only is it sort of a path to a sustainable life, I think the more you try to be something other than what you are, the less sustainable that is, because you're always trying to be something that you're not. But I think authenticity is also kind of a key factor in genuine intimacy and connections within relationships and friendships. And so it's important for us to be able to get in touch with our authentic selves and to provide people in our lives the opportunity to fall in love with the parts of us that make us who we are, instead of consistently concealing them and asking ourselves, what parts of me should I show now that are most agreeable to the people that I'm around? What can I do to make someone else happy and comfortable and like me better? And I think a big part of getting to this point in our healing journey is understanding how and why we suppressed our authenticity in the first place. So let's trace it back. I think for a lot of us who were raised by emotionally immature parents, it's common to feel like we are more attuned to our parents than we are to ourselves. They regulate us, essentially, because their emotions, their actions influence us and impact us more than our own. And so I know for me throughout my childhood, I felt like I always had to be happy. I always had to be aware. Feeling or expressing any kind of sadness or grief or anger or frustration felt like a burden. It felt like it was too much. And so I always refrained from expressing those sides of myself. But in truth, they're all human emotions. And learning how to acknowledge them and allowing yourself to feel them and process them is the healthy thing to do. And yet, for so many of us, I think we are conditioned to suppress so many of our emotions. And the more that we do that, the harder it can be for them to resurface, the harder it can be for us to be in touch with them. And so I think when we are talking about authenticity in childhood, authenticity is direct evidence of our individuality. And that, I think, can be really scary for an emotionally immature parent. I think that can kind of stir up these fears of rejection or abandonment. I think it is much easier for an emotionally immature parent to view you as this predictable fantasy-like character rather than a real individual with your own wants, needs, and emotions. I think predictability is a big thing when we're dealing with emotionally immature parents because they don't have the capacity to self-reflect and to feel and process their own emotions, never mind those of another person. And so I think a lot of these different feelings that are brought to the surface by authenticity and individuality are kind of uncomfortable. And rather than sitting with that discomfort and looking those anxieties in the face and making the decision to kind of face them head on, I think the path that a lot of emotionally immature parents take is to suppress those feelings in their children so that they don't have to deal with them, to kind of pretend like they're not there so that their own emotions continue to take precedence over those of their children. And so I think a lot of authentic behavior is discouraged when you're dealing with parents like this. I think, in Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents by Lindsay Gibson, she talks about the difference between internalizers versus externalizers. And I think when you are conditioned throughout childhood to sort of suppress your inner experience, your authentic self, if you are an internalizer, you might start to feel like your unique inner experience has no real legitimacy, like it doesn't carry any weight, because everything that you feel, that you think, that you do is secondary to that of your parent, which can distance you even more from your authentic self, because you're made to feel ashamed for characteristics of yours that differ from your parent. And that can be anything from specific interests of yours, whether it's a band that you like or an artist that you like, all the way down to very basic, raw human emotion, like enthusiasm and spontaneity, anger, grief, sadness. These things aren't convenient for an emotionally immature parent. I think they are much harder to control. And so instead, behaviors and feelings like self-doubt and blind obedience, uncertainty, those are the things that are accepted, desired, preferred even by an emotionally immature parent. And I think one of the reasons that these behaviors are more favorable to them is because if you don't feel grounded, if you consistently question yourself, if you are always taking other people's thoughts and feelings into consideration before your own, you're never asking for help, it can be much harder for you to develop these other parts of you that make you feel like an individual, that make you feel grounded and confident. And I think you can be much easier to manipulate when you embody these behaviors, this self-doubt, this self-neglect, this sort of blind obedience. They're all very self-defeating characteristics. And I think with that, it sort of does some of the job for an emotionally immature parent for them, because you're already sort of distanced from your authentic self. You're already developing your own personality and identity on the back burner. You're suppressing and hiding a lot of these real, true emotions that make you into a fully formed whole being. Instead, it's sort of like you serve a purpose, and that purpose is to serve your parent first. And things like authenticity, things like spontaneity, things like you speaking up when you feel like you've been wronged, don't really allow for that. I think they make that much harder. And so those kinds of behaviors are often discouraged. And I think what's really interesting in the chapter that I'm reading right now, Lindsay Gibson talks about how emotionally immature parents seek not only to control what their child does or how they do it, but also what they think and how they feel. And this, I think, is when we really start to get into some murkier waters, because thoughts and feelings are exactly that, thoughts and feelings. You thinking something doesn't necessarily make it so. And it's natural, I think, for you to feel things on both sides of the spectrum and everywhere in between, and to allow those feelings to come and go. It doesn't necessarily make you a bad person if you have a bad thought or if you have a bad feeling. And yet, emotionally immature parents will seek to control even these very personal human aspects of our lives. And so now, not only are we hyper aware of our own behavior, of the things that we're doing and the words that we're using, but now we also start to feel like we have to be aware of the thoughts that we're thinking and the feelings that we're feeling. And what feels true to us, our true thoughts and feelings, can start to feel unsafe, because when we do express them, when we lean into them, that can sometimes result in distance from the people that we depend on. And so throughout childhood, especially, I think, with this inherent sort of power dynamic at play, you rely on your parents in early childhood for your basic survival needs. And in that environment, I think it's so much easier to kind of forego the things that you're thinking, the way that you're feeling for survival, because they don't feel as important as the love or attention or support from your parents. But I think what's so dangerous is the more that we forego these things, the more that we don't allow ourselves to even have thoughts that are true to ourselves, the further away our authentic self can feel. I think the harder it can be to get to know that version of us. And for a lot of us, I think it's not until we're in our adult life and we've distanced ourselves from these relationships that we are just able to start to ask ourselves these questions. Who are we? What do we like? What do we not like? And then we can start the process of systematically sort of letting go of all of the guilt that's associated with not being the person that we've always been, and learning and evolving and kind of getting to know ourselves in a new way. It can be so scary, I think, to allow yourself to show an authentic version of yourself to other people, when for so much of your life, the people who were supposed to be your most solid support system, sort of your biggest cheerleaders, were putting you down for the things that make you you. They were kind of criticizing all of these different aspects of your personality, of your identity, that weren't convenient for them, that made it more difficult for them to control you and to manipulate you. And I think that can result in this wall being up consistently, no matter who you're around, because it doesn't feel safe to allow those parts of you to show. Never mind the fact that you may not even be in touch with those parts of yourself yet. That in and of itself is a journey. It's a process of getting to know yourself, which takes time, and it can be really challenging. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. I think it all starts, though, with us allowing ourselves the space to discover who we are. And from there, letting go of the fear of being seen. I think for so many of us, it's common throughout childhood to develop this perfectionism, this hypervigilance, where not only do we feel like we always have to be on, like we always have to be aware and agreeable, but we're also so fearful of making mistakes, because everything that's going on already is enough. And we don't want to be the ones to add to the stress or to the tension of a situation. And so we're thinking about everything that we're saying. We're thinking about everything that we're doing before we say or do it, to make sure that it's just right, to minimize the possibility of anything ever going wrong. And the truth of the matter is, this is something that I have learned that at times is uncomfortable. Life is messy. And there are going to be times when you learn by doing, by making mistakes. Sometimes you have to do the wrong thing so that you know what the right thing is. And it can be so challenging to allow yourself that freedom and to free yourself of the expectations, not only that you think others have for you, but also the ones that you have for yourself. It is such a profound relief, I think, to allow yourself to be human and to make mistakes, to not always be perfect, and to let all of these different sides of yourself show. Because authenticity, I think, again, it's what leads to genuine connection. And I know even in my life, there are people whose imperfections and flaws and quirks, silly things that they say or do, are what make me love them so much. And I would be so upset if they felt like they had to conceal those things from me because it made them less agreeable, or because they thought that I wouldn't receive them well. You know, I did an entire episode quite some time ago now on expectations and managing expectations, both of other people and of ourselves. That's episode 12 of It's Not Normal, if you want to check that out. And we also did one, episode 32, called Your Human is Showing. And I think that kind of goes hand in hand with a lot of what we're talking about in this week's episode, because to be authentic is to be human, I think. And things like making mistakes and having these silly, weird quirks or these specific interests all tie into that. And I think the reason that I wanted to talk about this week is because this past weekend was one of the first times that I truly felt in touch with my authentic self, from how I was acting in the moment and the amount of mental energy that I was expending on other people, all the way down to the clothes that I was wearing, the outfit that I picked out, and how I styled my hair. It felt so true to me, and I felt so comfortable, and I felt so lucky to be at a point in my healing journey where I have an idea of who my authentic self is. And I feel like there are moments when I feel really connected to her. And I think the more I experience moments like that, the more motivation I have to continue to get to know that person. And I think when I'm around other people and this authentic version of myself is present and is being accepted and welcomed and encouraged, I think it makes it that much easier for me to kind of tear down this wall with other people in my life. Because, you know, it's part of the process of letting go of expectations and understanding that not everyone in your life is going to like you or love you or show up for you. Your personalities might not mesh, and that's okay. I think when you're raised by an emotionally immature parent, nothing is more important than being agreeable, than being this predictable fantasy character that they view you as. And it is so easy to seamlessly sort of integrate that same way of thinking into every other relationship in your life. Because on the surface, you're being rewarded for it with friendship, with love, with being included. And yet, there can be times, I know there have been in my life, when I was around people, but I didn't feel fulfilled. I didn't feel that camaraderie. And the difference, I think, when you allow yourself to be authentic and to let all of these different parts of yourself show, is that when the people around you are accepting of that, you feel so fulfilled. You feel proud of who you are and comfortable to kind of lean into those things even more. And, you know, just in saying it out loud, it's so clear to me why an emotionally immature parent would discourage behavior that kind of lends you to feeling this way. Because when you feel grounded and confident in who you are, not only does it encourage you to kind of do those things more and to become more in touch with yourself, but I think it's also it's sort of a gateway to you fostering healthy relationships. And a healthy relationship is one that is free of control and manipulation. And so if you're left feeling like you're less than, like you're uncertain, you're doubting yourself, you don't know what's right, you have to look to someone else for guidance, I think it's just so much easier for them to predict what you're going to do because you've been conditioned to do what they want. Earlier this week, I was a guest on the Steph and Craig show, which is actually coming out today, so be sure to check that out. They are amazing and were so wonderful to talk to. And right before we hopped on the call, I was feeling a little bit nervous. And I was trying to ask myself, why am I feeling nervous? What am I scared of? And the first thing that came to mind was, I'm scared of messing up, or I'm scared of maybe not knowing what to say or fumbling over my words. And then I thought to myself, the things that I was fearful of are things that are just sometimes a part of me. I think that I just wanted to perform well. And I think that kind of ties back into expectations and this fear of being seen, where if I do fumble over my words, that's okay. I think it can be so common when you're raised by emotionally immature parents to feel skeptical of who you truly are and to feel like you kind of have to put on this show for everyone else that is much more perfect, that is much more attentive than how you truly feel. And I think how most people truly feel. And so for me, I started to realize that I don't need to be nervous because whatever happens, it's me. And I'm getting to a point where I feel comfortable with who I am. But personally, I think one of the reasons that it's been such a challenge for me, and I'm sure for a lot of you, is because I'm fearful of being open and sort of forthcoming with my vulnerabilities. And I think our vulnerabilities are kind of entwined with our authenticity. They're a part of who we are. And sometimes they are brought to the surface. And allowing them to show, for me, has at times felt like I was inviting hurt. Like I have now shown a weakness of mine, and I have a fear of my weakness being exploited. I have a fear of being manipulated. I think I developed throughout childhood a tendency to hide things that were important to me and things that maybe made me uncomfortable, that were a little bit more sensitive. Even sharing on social media, I think there was a post of mine that went viral not long ago, and it made its way to the wrong audience, and the comments were overwhelmingly negative, flooded with things like, I feel bad for your parents. Oh, you're talking about narcissism. You're the actual narcissist. And I understand that anytime you put yourself out there, especially on social media, you're inviting all kinds of criticism. But anytime I thought about addressing that, or maybe talking about the fact that that had a negative impact on me, I always hesitated because I felt like I was providing the people who have said these hurtful things with the ammunition that they need to hurt me even further. And I know that it's not right for me to kind of base the things that I say or don't say off of the opinions of other people or off of what I think people are going to say to me or how they'll respond. But again, I think it's one of those unlearning experiences where I have to let go of that fear that comes along with being vulnerable and understand that not everyone that I share those things with is going to exploit them, is going to use them to manipulate me in some way. But again, when you grow up and that's your reality, it can be really challenging to imagine that anyone else wouldn't do that or that they would do anything different. And so I think putting myself out there with this podcast and with everything that I post on social media is sort of a personal practice for me to fight against that fear and to understand that I can be in touch with my authentic self and I can share that with other people and my assumptions of other people's reactions to my authentic self shouldn't govern my decisions or the way that I feel about myself. But that is no small feat. I think that is why doing this podcast and being a part of this community on social media has been so challenging, but also so helpful for me. I think it has made me stronger in a lot of ways, and it's made me feel more in touch with my authentic self. And for that, I feel really grateful. And so I want to wrap up this week's episode by asking you, what can you do to feel more in touch with your authentic self? And I want to invite you to be mindful, not only when you're on your own, but also during different social interactions with different people in your life, friends, family, a partner, sort of these different group dynamics. If you can catch yourself in the moment, take a minute and ask yourself, do I feel like I am being authentic? Do I feel in touch with my authentic self? Are there parts of me that I am hiding, that I'm concealing from this particular person or group? And if so, why? I think sort of catching yourself in the moment and asking yourself those questions can be really helpful for you to realize what you might be doing without even noticing it. And I think it can be one of those situations where when you ask yourself these questions, if you don't feel like you're being your true, authentic self, you can kind of test the waters. You can sort of push your boundaries here and say, okay, let me try and do this. Or let me go ahead and say this and see how it's received. It's sort of a practice. And from there, I think it'll become clear to you who the people in your life are who love you unconditionally, who want you to sing loud in the car and dance when you're out and embrace all of the silliness and the quirks that you have, and who the people in your life are who feel uncomfortable by those things, who would kind of make you feel silly or bad for doing those things and embracing those parts of yourself. And we've talked about this before too. As you heal, your circle may become smaller, which can be a challenging thing to reconcile, but I feel like it's better to be around people who love you for you, who encourage you and make you feel comfortable enough to lean into your authentic self, than people who have a certain expectation of you and will make you feel less than when you don't meet that expectation. And I guess lastly, I just want you to know, this is something that I have come to realize that I still have to convince myself of sometimes. You are allowed to change. As you discover new parts of yourself or old parts of yourself resurface and you're reconnected with them, you are allowed to grow and evolve and change. You do not have to be the same person that you've always been. As a matter of fact, if you are, that might be a little worrying. I think it's our duty as humans to evolve. And anyone who makes you feel otherwise may not be in your life for the right reasons. With that, I think I'm going to be wrapping up this week's episode. I really hope you enjoyed it and were able to take something positive from it. At the very least, maybe now you can start to think about your authentic self, whether or not you're in touch with them, and start to take steps to getting to know that version of yourself better and actually allowing it to shine through. Be sure to check out the Steph and Craig Show. The episode, I think, drops today. I was super excited to be invited to be on their podcast, and we had a really great conversation, so be sure to check that out. Also, if you're watching on YouTube, be sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel. If you're listening on Spotify, please be sure to leave us a rating. I will be back next week with another episode of It's Not Normal, the podcast.